Thank you all. It's great to be here. I was here last year out in the audience, and it's great to be back this year with a totally new venture that I'm sharing for the first time with a public audience here today. So thanks for joining me. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and how I arrived here. My career started at Disney in the corporate strategic planning department. I became president of the Tribeca Film Festival and Tribeca Enterprises, which is the holding company for Tribeca, which we ended up selling 50% to Madison Square Garden of in 2014. And then I joined the New York City Football Club, the MLS team in New York, and became president of the team in 2016, and I was there for 3 years. Towards the tail end of my time at NYCFC, I started to think a lot about the opportunities that might exist in professional women's sports. I started looking at investments in existing leagues. About 6 months into that process, I partnered with my now co-founder of Athletes Unlimited, Jonathan Soros, and we began looking not just at investments in existing leagues, but maybe what the opportunity might be to start a totally new league from scratch. 5 months later, we founded Athletes Unlimited. This was in May of 2020. And just earlier this week, we formally announced the launch of Athletes Unlimited and the launch of our first pro sports league, which will be professional women's softball. So what is Athletes Unlimited? Athletes Unlimited is a network of pro sports leagues that all follow the same operating model. We are going to have a network of new leagues that will exist. Softball will be the first. It will launch in August of this year. We will have a goal of 3 leagues by 2021 and then plan to have more beyond that. Starting in women's sports, because that's where we think the biggest opportunity is, but this model could certainly apply to professional men's sports as well. Key elements about Athletes Unlimited. First, the players participate in all aspects of governance and leadership of the league. Second, they share in 50% of the profits. And third, they're very involved in day-to-day decision-making. Right now, we have a player advisory board on the softball side we've been working with since October. Those are the first 4 players to sign. We talk to them every day. They're involved in every aspect of what I'm about to share with you and show to you. The format of the league. There'll be 56 players in softball. It will make up 4 teams. All of the games will happen in one market, so this entire season will take place from August 17th to September 27th in Rosemont, Illinois, which is right outside Chicago. And again, as I said, it's a 6-week season. So here's how the competition format works. Players change teams every week, and points are awarded based on how well your team does in a given week and how well you do as an individual. Therefore, points are changing every single play. We're taking a sport like softball, and we're totally redefining what the consumer and fan experience will be like. Here's how you get points as a player. First, how your team does not just every game, but every inning. Second, how other fellow players rank your performance. So we will have 3 MVPs per game that will be voted on by the players in that game. And then finally, how players perform as individuals in key statistical areas. I'm going to jump into a little more detail, but before I do, I just want to share with you a little trailer and a little fun video we've put together. Oh, go back. Can you hit the video?
The world tries to place limits on you, telling you what an athlete looks like, what fandom feels like, what pro sports should be like. But limits exist to be surpassed. It's time for athletes to call the shots, for fans to come first, for games to be reimagined. It's time to transform the world of pro sports. Introducing Athletes Unlimited, new leagues with the world's best athletes, starting with softball in 2020, where a 6-week season means non-stop action, where athletes score individual points so that every moment counts, where faster games mean can't miss a thing, edge-of-your-seat competition, where each week top scorers become captains, draft new teams, and compete for higher stakes than ever before, where every play is a chance to win big. Welcome to a new age of competition. Athletes Unlimited.
Awesome. So let me take you through some of the analysis behind the launch. As I said, we formally started this in May, and we've been working, I think, to take a fairly analytical approach to the whole process. So first of all, the foundational research for this and the insights came in partnership with a group called the Sports Innovation Lab. Angela Ruggiero and Josh Walker are based here in Boston. They have an incredible group, and we started working with them in May, basically around the publishing of a new report that they had put out on what they call the fluid fan of the future. And the fluid fan has a number of characteristics, which you can see outlined kind of in the far column, but it's really about the changing face of fandom. And I think the key element that I've highlighted kind of towards the bottom of the page is we fundamentally believe that fans of the future are going to be more interested in following players than they are in following teams or leagues. And especially we think this applies to any new emerging league, that if you're a new emerging league, you want to break through to what is a crowded marketplace, leaning into this concept of how you can put the players front and center and reduce the friction between the players and the fans is really the biggest opportunity. Why start with women's sports? We fundamentally believe this is where the biggest market opportunity exists. As I said, I started this process sitting at my desk at NYCFC, thinking about what's happening prior to the World Cup. This was now a year prior to the World Cup, but thinking about the opportunity that existed in women's sports. I'd seen what had happened in men's sports in MLS in a very short period of time. When I joined in 2016, there were a tremendous number of naysayers in MLS. By the time now it was 2019, I was seeing huge growth and huge opportunity. I looked at the roster of the MIT Sloan Conference today, and while there are a number of women and female executives represented, there are only 2 of us who are primarily focused on women's sports right now. I'm a huge believer when people are rushing one way, you should rush the other way. I really believe women's sports presents this as an opportunity, and I think the market statistics show that's the case. Women's sports still only attracts 1% of the sports sponsorship market and only 3% of the print and 4% of the online sports coverage. So as I said, our research, we've been conducting a 3-phased research project with a group called Insights Consulting. We've just completed the 3rd phase, which is a national survey of 1,000 fans, and so we'll come back with dispositive kind of research that will cover fans across the country. I'm going to present to you today kind of what was phase 2 of those results, which involved 350 fans. The phase 3 results are showing total consistency with the phase 2 result, which is great. We went out and we tested a concept. And the basic idea was, first of all, do people understand the concept? And for those who do, which turned out to be basically everybody, who does it appeal to? So here's what we found. We got incredibly positive results. The basic definition was that there is basically strong universal appeal and interest in this concept. Clearly, everyone will wait to see how it plays out. But at first blush, when people hear about the concept and what I've described to you today and go into it in a little more detail, it's universally appealing to people. It applies to both men and women. So interestingly enough, yes, people like and are attracted to the concept that this is in women's sports, but that's not a huge factor. It is a little bit more popular with women than it is with men. And I think the big finding is it's really popular with younger fans relative to older fans. Again, universal appeal across all age groups, but nonetheless, much stronger appeal among young fans. We asked them about 10 elements. It was outlined on that slide, but there were 10 kind of effectively different elements of this model. And then we actually surveyed and said, which is the most appealing element of this new model, all the way down to kind of what's number 10 in that ranking. And I think this is where you see some of the really interesting findings. So the most appealing aspect of the model for young fans is this is letting us connect with athletes on social. I just heard Jimmy Pitaro talk. We need to reduce the friction. We need to put athletes front and center. In this 6-week model, we've contracted with the athletes. They will all be in Chicago the entire time. We will have cameras. We will have social media on them the entirety of the 6 weeks. There's no going back home to your home market. There's no travel time wasted. This is basically one incredibly high-quality athletic competition with huge stakes on the ground, but we are going to create a content studio where we control the field, we control the practice facilities, and we will be with those athletes effectively all the time. Again, only doing things they want us to do, only doing things that they've already approved, but nonetheless, it will be a huge focus. So that appeals obviously to younger fans, probably not that surprising. Payouts based on individual standings. This is where you see the real dichotomy between younger fans and older fans. That's the second most appealing thing to the younger fans. On the other hand, older fans, is number 9. So they find it less appealing. They're saying, you're destroying the dynamics of team sports. How can this really work? Now isn't this going to create all this adverse behavior between individuals going out? On the other hand, and we've addressed that in the model, and I'll explain that later, but the bottom line is for younger fans, they love this idea. They love the idea that the athletes have points on the line, have money on the line everywhere, and this idea that the leaderboard is constantly changing. That's appealing to both groups. This idea that every play you're going to be watching in an Athletes Unlimited game is going to have stakes, and you'll see the leaderboard in the case of softball, 56 players, and player 13 may vault ahead of player 10 or drop back down, and we know that there's be stakes on the ground for them in any case. And then starting with women's sports, I said, it's a factor. It's definitely an appealing factor. It's actually more appealing to older fans than it is to younger fans. And then lastly, the top athletes, which I think is interesting. We are going to have the top athletes in the world in each sport. That is for sure. That said, it's much more important to older fans that you have the top athletes than it is to younger fans. It's important to both, but again, there's a distinction there. So today's presentation, I'm introducing you to the concept. You're the first audience hearing about Athletes Unlimited in this kind of format. But I'm really going to take you through the new model of scoring. It's perfect for MIT Sloan, and I'm hopeful that there are a lot of you in the audience who will connect with me during or after to talk more about this. I really do want your thoughts and feedback. We have a great team on the analytics side who's been working through all of this. But today you're seeing it, and you're the first audience to really go through it in detail. So here's how the players' ranking system is going to work. Each player in the league will be ranked using a cumulative point system, and you get points based on 3 factors. As I said, team wins, MVPs of the game, and then individual statistics. So the first factor, win points. And I should point out one of the big things, which I will talk about in a few slides, is we wanted to keep this system very simple. And that is a huge balancing act, because we want something that's accurate, we want something that's really going to reflect who the best players are and who deserves to be rewarded. But we want this to be something that a fan or a young person sitting in the stands can take out a piece of paper and a pencil, or take out their phone, or take out ultimately the app we create, and be able to very easily communicate this. So this is a very simple point system. You get points as a player if your team wins an inning. You get 10 points. For the game, you get 50 points. And it's a skins format, so if first inning's tied 0-0, the points will roll over to the second inning. I think that's really straightforward. Everyone in the audience gets that. Second factor, really simple, MVPs of the game. After players come off the field, they'll go back, they'll vote on who are the MVPs of the game. We will rank them 1 through 3, and points will be rewarded to those 3 players. And then finally, the most complicated part of this, which if you walk down the halls here, you'll see all the great presentations and work that's done by a lot of really smart people, but it's how do you cover the individual statistics? How do you get the right measure of individual contribution? So 2 things that were really the challenges. How do we accurately measure productivity, and how do you compare offense to pitching? And the methodology we came up with was twofold. We really wanted something that approximated on-base plus slugging percentage, and we wanted something that approximated ERA. It's pretty straightforward. But the key is the average offensive player should score similar to the average pitcher. So here's how the offensive scoring works. Again, straightforward. I want you to all understand this is an explicit objective here, is how do you keep it straightforward? How do you have an average fan sitting in the stands and being able to calculate this? 10 points for walks, 10 points for scored sacrifices, 10 points for stolen bases, and you lose 10 points for caught stealing, 10 for a single, 20 for a double, 30 for a triple, and 40 for a home run. Really straightforward. Batter goes 2 for 4 with a home run, a single, and caught stealing, 40 points for that home run, 50 points for that, 10 points for the single, and they'll lose 10 points for being caught stealing. How does it work on pitching? Again, incredibly straightforward. You get 4 points for every recorded out, and you lose 10 points for every earned run allowed. If you throw 4.1 innings, you allow 2 earned runs, you're going to get credit for 13 outs times 4 points per out, and you lose 2 earned runs for you lose 10 points for each of the earned runs. So how do we come up with this? What do we do? There is an existing pro women's softball league, I should mention. It's called the National Pro Fast Pitch League. We are partners with the National Pro Fast Pitch League. The commissioner is a senior advisor to us. And the way it's going to work in softball is the women will play in their existing league. It will end early August, and then our league, Athletes Unlimited, will be a 6-week season on top of that. So for those of you who are interested in how we're creating and expanding opportunities, one of our goals from the beginning is we're not going to come in and compete with the existing league. Let's create an additional opportunity. This is actually, I think, an issue across women's sports. We've seen the WNBA try to address this. I think they're now providing year-round opportunities for about 30 of the players in the league, but there's still a huge number of players that are having to go overseas or find other jobs. So for us, the logic was, why don't we just come in and be complementary? We'll provide another playing opportunity for the best players in the world. So we went to the MPF, we looked at their data over the last 5 years, we created a hypothetical league of the top 40 offensive players and the top 16 pitchers, and we calculated the difference between the average pitcher and the average offensive player. That's outlined on the right side of the page. So you can see in different years, there are some years where the pitcher will be a little higher than the average offensive player, or vice versa. But on average, it nets out at about 15%, which is about 15 points, which is about less than 5% of the total score. Shows a differential between the offensive pitchers. So you can see it up here. This is the 56-player pool. These are 56 players, the 56 best players as identified in the NPF. And our scoring system works perfectly. Amanda Chittister is a USA Olympian, widely regarded as the MVP of the league. She ends up at the top of the scoring. It goes down, and what you can see in yellow is you can see how the top pitchers were distributed throughout. So it's a very equal distribution of both offensive players and pitchers. So how does this add up in total? So with the win points that I mentioned, the maximum points a player can earn is you can earn 10 points every inning, as I mentioned, times 7 innings. You can earn 50 points a game, and there are 15 games in the season. I should have said that at the outset. Each team will play 3 games a week, and it'll be 5 weeks of games. The first week will be a combine and training. So it's 1,800 points. So again, if you have a 50% win rate, which we do assume in this model, which is that because the players will be selecting teams, there's absolutely no reason to assume that one team will, or one player should be on average a better team than anybody else. You'd end up with 900 points. On the MVP side, the maximum points anyone can earn is 900 points. Again, we think that kind of an elite player who would kind of average second place in an MVP standings every game would get 600 points. And then individual points average out between 100 and 500 points. So this is kind of what a typical point breakdown will look like for the average player and the elite player. And you can see the difference here is the blue part of the chart, which is we're assuming the average player doesn't gain any MVP points. So the average player ends up on a 50% win rate team. They have 900 points for that. They get 225 points for their statistics. And the elite player, on the other hand, happened to be on a slightly above average team. They got 1080, 400, and 500. The big concern, right, is what happens if your top player happens to be on a low-performing team, right, and low-performing teams each week. So what we've done here is we've modeled that out as well, which we've shown on the left-hand side, the top performer who happens to end up being on the weak teams, where it doesn't work out that it's actually a 50% win rate. So even with their lower win rate, their MVP points and their individual stat points outweighed the player who is typically not as strong a player, but ended up on strong teams. So we think we've covered for that as well, and that's the big question we've had in the scoring module, which is how much emphasis do you put on team points, MVP points, and individual points? And in our case, a lot of the points are staked on your winning as a team. We want to keep that team dynamic in place, but we've now filtered in, obviously, individual statistics. So I see it up here, wins above replacement. That's the statistic, and that everyone kind of in baseball, I think, has defaulted towards as kind of the default, maybe best estimation of a player's impact. So why didn't we just use WAR? I mean, we were not averse to using the existing statistic if it worked for us, but what we found is that really it's just not simple enough to calculate. The average fan can't follow it. You know the output, but how do you actually calculate it? And it's also not standardized. So we think that the big limitation on our model is that we haven't captured defense, right? That is a huge issue, right? How do you just have batting? Our view on that is 2 things. One, we hope and expect that the MVP stat will factor in defense, and that it is unlikely that a really strong defensive player or a very weak defensive player would not have that captured in their MVP vote. So how are we doing all of this? LBI Software, who's here today, and Conduct, Stack Crew, Catapult, Rapsodo, these are all of the partners in developing this totally new system and this new database. I should say that we are heavily leaning into a lot of biometric data, pitch speed, velocity, things that are typically not done, honestly, in sports like professional women's softball. And I would say that is kind of one of my big takeaways that I have from my experience in the sports industry is that for emerging sports, the bar for competition is so high because you're up against leagues like the NFL or MLB or others that are terrific leagues, but have huge resources to put towards data, statistics, analytics. And so we are coming out in a very strong way from the beginning and giving that type of analysis, that type of data, that type of media and social coverage to sports that we think are incredibly attractive and appealing. Softball, for those who don't know, Jimmy Pitaro said today that NFL ratings were up 8% on ESPN last year. Anyone want to guess what softball ratings were up last year on ESPN? It was published in Front Office Sports today. 20%. Softball was the best performing sport on ESPN in last season. They've expanded coverage, and we think there's total opportunity on the professional women's side. It's a great sport to watch, and we're going to be doing it both on television but also on digital channels as well. So that's our first sport. We're then going to move forward to other sports, which we are very close. We have finalized our arrangement for the second sport, when we will announce that later this spring, and then, as I said, other sports are in active development. We've put together an amazing advisory board of great champion athletes, top of their professions, Olympians, world champions, both men and women. We'll be announcing that this spring, and then we'll be announcing our media and brand partners coming very soon. And then finally, and most importantly, the softball players report on August 17th, 2020. Thank you so much. Please follow us. Our microsite is up right now, www.auprosports.com. We're on most of the social channels. Our presence will be growing and expanding. Again, our microsite is just up. We just announced this on March 3rd, Tuesday. So you guys, again, are among the first, but I'd appreciate you guys kind of jumping in, following, and I'd love to take some questions. Thanks very much.
What platforms are you looking to start broadcasting on, since it's a very new league?
Great question. So we are doing a pretty wide search. So we are talking to traditional broadcasters and a huge focus on digital platforms as well. So I really a lot of respect for kind of the OTT paywall subscription services. I think that is a possibility for us, but really our focus is how do we get our games out in front of the paywall, get it in front of a lot of audiences. We're looking at different forms of broadcasting. I think what ESPN is doing with X Games, for example, coming up now, a lot of that's on their social channels, some of it's on the networks. And so we're having broad conversations, and we will see where we end up. And I think probably in the next month, we'll certainly be announcing what our plans are. But we want it to be a mix of traditional, because we do think for both the athletes and for some component of sports fans, it's still important, we think, for you to be connected to a big distributor. But we want most of that content to be where younger fans are. And you can see that's what our analysis is showing us, which is that this is about the concept resonates with younger fans, and it's where we'd want to be. Even if it didn't, we would want to be there.
All right, so what lessons can you learn in that space from a sport like the XFL, which is coming in and kind of doing different things in the media marketplace?
Yeah, it's a great question. So listen, starting a new sports league is a tremendously hard undertaking. When I gave the story at the beginning, I was looking at kind of investments in the WNBA or National Women's Soccer League, and Jonathan Soros was, again, my co-founder on this, came to me with this idea. Honestly, my first reaction was, it's kind of crazy. Like, there's a huge barrier to get over. Do you know how many leagues haven't succeeded? And so when we started talking, and a lot of this was his initial ideas, was, all right, but what if we do it totally differently? And that is what appealed to me about this, which was you have to be totally different. You have to uplift the athletes. And I think the success on the XFL side, and part of one of the things I have taken away, and I take it away a little bit more from one of the leagues that didn't succeed last year, is we are in one city, 6 weeks, huge focus on concentrated attention and also concentrated resources, and I really like that model. I think the idea of starting a sports league and going to 10 markets or 12 markets right off the bat, I think that's totally, I don't understand it, honestly, in this day and age. I think the media and the social coverage and what you do in one city is just a better model, so that got me excited. So we will have, so first of all, there will be 4 players that don't get drafted every week. If it wasn't clear, the way it'll work is the top 4 players in the standings will draft the teams. Monday morning, there will be a draft. They'll draft their players. 52 players will be drafted. 4 won't get drafted, unfortunately. They'll be our reserve pool, and then we'll have an additional reserve pool after that as well.
Hi, thank you for taking the step out on this, because I agree with all of what you just said about women's sports. Question I have is, how do you account for, let's say, their top player always wants to bring her best friend on the team?
You got it.
And that has an impact on how things work out in the standings.
You know what? I think if they do, that's what we're leaving it up to. I mean, I did take... When we were sitting there in our kind of offices and working through this in January, I hadn't thought as much about the NBA All-Star Game as I did kind of in February when it got such a good reception to kind of the new format and everything. And obviously they'd done the voting and having the 2 captains. But I think fans are going to love that, and I think the athletes are rational actors. I'm sure some of that will happen. I hope it all evens out at the end of the day, but I don't know the answer, and the athletes are going to have to figure that out on their own. We're not gonna not control for it.
Can you speak a little bit over here about how you plan to compensate the players, what the pay structure is? Is everybody getting the same value, or how does that look?
So there's a minimum base compensation of $10,000 for the 6 weeks. It'll go up to $35,000 in softball, and there'll be basically each player will they'll also be provided housing, medical, most of the meals, and that will effectively more than double the compensation that they earn from what they get. So in other words, it's equivalent to what you would earn. It's actually more than what you would earn in the regular pro softball season. But basically, that's the structure. So there's a little bit of variance in the base salary, fairly modest, and there's a guaranteed minimum. And then, again, you're going to be able to earn bonuses for everything I've just said. And then the final standings will be where there'll be kind of the bigger reward.
Can you go into a little bit of detail on the criteria for selecting the cities as well as selecting the next sport?
Yeah, absolutely.
Outside of it being a women's sport?
Yep, absolutely. So, we started this process with an idea of Athletes Unlimited and a structure of a league, and then we thought about kind of every possible sport and what would make sense for us. We saw the biggest window of opportunity with softball. The next sport that we are going to go into has huge youth participation, growing at the youth level. There is no pro league in the format in the United States, and we think there are at least 3 to 6 more sports. I think one of the biggest factors, and I guess this is almost at the top of the list, is the receptivity of the players and the existing organizations within the league. When I called, Sherry Kemp at MPF and said, "Hey, listen, this is something we're trying to work on," she said, "This is awesome. Like, you're creating a new opportunity for players." I will tell you that's not exactly the response I've gotten in some of the more established sports where, somebody says, "Can you send us our detailed business plan and we'll review it by our committee?" And that's just not the way we want to work. And then the players are most important. Like, how do the players respond? As for the cities we choose, we've got an incredible situation in Rosemont. Again, coming from NYCFC and other MLS teams that have had to be a second or third tenant in a building, it's a really, really hard economic model. So I was really focused on where could we find a venue and a partner, and we have an incredible partner in the village of Rosemont who was willing to give us a venue we wouldn't have to move in and out of all the time, and we'd have practice facilities, good accommodations for the players, and how do we make it a really welcoming environment. The cities we're looking at for Sport 2, I would say we've been pretty good on the housing front and the training front, but finding that competition venue is hard. And as I said, being a third or fourth tenant, if somebody wants to charge you every time you're moving in and out, it kills startup sports leagues. I mean, that's one of the things, to go back to your question, which is, everyone's run into the same complication. To go into NFL stadiums and play, games that only need, in the best case, 10 or 20% of the capacity. I mean, great for the stadium owners, not great for the league or for the athletes themselves. Thank you all very much. I really appreciate your time. I hope you enjoyed it. Come on up. Thanks.